All right, let's take a look at where we left off last time. If I press play here, you can see we have snow. We have a couple of other effects. We have fire. Actually, let's just walk around so you can see it. There's something else that's kind of missing. And what it is the reason our game looks sort of generic and ununique, aside from the crazy random, see if maybe I can get close enough to bump the door and then there we go. Our game doesn't have a distinctive look. So there's some things we need to do. So first of all, let's go to our player armature rather. I'm gonna hit F to focus. And we want to select our main camera and make sure that post-processing is on. Next thing I'm gonna do is, let's turn off our particles for a second. And I wanna create a empty object in our scene. And I'm gonna call this post-processing volume, PPV. And I'm gonna click on add component and I'm gonna type in volume and add a volume here. Now, what this does is it essentially allows us to do cool effects like depth of field and all that other good stuff. Now, with the post-processing volume here, one of the things we need to do is make sure that we have a new volume profile. There's a few that come standard with your project, but we're just going to click new for now and create an empty one. And an override is a way of overriding our scene. So if we look at our camera here and I click on, for example, vignette, and I turn on color, center, intensity, like all this stuff, right? And I take my intensity up, you'll start to notice the corners of my scene will start to do like a vignette. So you can add like a little bit of a shadow. So let's say we're making a horror game around the corner. So something like that. Another thing we can do is if I type in CUL, we can do a color adjustment. Now I tend to do a post exposure and I turn on contrast. And I tend to give it a little bit more of a contrast like this. And then I increase the saturation depending on if it's cartoony or not. So you can play around with these. If you want to do like a black and white game, you could take the saturation all the way down if you want to make it ultra bright. So generally what I'll do is I'll take my brightness just a little bit to push the color in the scene. So there's a lot of really good ones. Another really good one is just depth of field. Now, in real life, when you're looking at something, you'll probably, if you do this as an exercise, if you look straight, the things in your peripheral vision will tend to blur, as well as things that are further in a distance when you're focusing on one thing. So for instance, if we move this way back here, and in my post-processing volume, I turn on depth of field, I can do, for instance, Gaussian. I can turn on start and end. If I make these both 0, 0 is the starting point right on the camera, you'll notice it's all blurry. But as I move this forward, the things start to come into focus. You can see the robot is in focus. And maybe I'll go up to the door of the house, but I'll want things like this to stay blurry. So I can keep going so that it's unblurry, but you can see I want it to be a little blurry. So what's nice about this is it really does give the impression that it makes the game feel more realistic. So as I'm running away, you can see that sphere is blurry and it becomes a little bit more in focus as I get close to it. So it's just a nice way of controlling the look of your game. Another thing we can do, which works hand in hand, is under your lighting tab here, which is in window, and then you want to go to rendering and then lighting. You'll notice that there's these mixed lighting, light map settings, all this stuff. And there's real-time lighting. And under the environment section, you'll even have even more options. Sort of just one option that I like to look at is fog. So if I turn on fog, give it a second, you can actually increase the density of the fog. And this is a little crazy, but let's say 0.1, maybe a little bit too much. Let's do 0.05 or 0.3. And so that also helps us to sort of build out a little bit of, like you could see there's fog on the environment. Generally, you'll have some sort of like here. Let's open up Pro Builder. You'll have like trees or something that masks the area. So, for instance, with this wall down at the bottom here, I believe this was a Pro Builder asset. Oh, it's not. It's just a regular plane. I'm actually going to hit Pro Builderize, and that'll turn this plane into a Pro Builder. Actually, before I do that, let me just delete this. And then what I'm going to do is create a new shape, and it's just going to be a plane. So something huge like this. I'm going to scroll my wheel out a little bit. So this will allow us to edit it. And then I'm going to grab these edges here and just sort of confine this area here by holding Shift and moving it up. So we kind of have these walls. And these could be, later you can add like additional houses that are around it. Or maybe this is a courtyard area, but we can see our fog a little bit better in this game view here. Because fog plays off of geometry. So that adds another layer of realism to our game. You can also change the fog color. You could do that through code or in here. So you can see I gave it a little bit of a reddish tint. And let me see if I believe they made a move this, but let's see if they still have the ambient. I think they moved this to a different spot. Well, you can see here, actually, I just typed in A, and there's all these other effects, like film grain. If we turn this on, we can make it look like a 1920s film. Again, sort of horror. We kind of really cranked this up so you could see it. So there's a lot of these really great post-processing effects you can add to your game to give it a lot of personality. And again, some of this stuff, like say you meet a monster, you can actually turn on and off film grain and these different post-processing effects in your game to give it a little bit more personality and to help your overall design. I kind of like that film grain. I'm going to bring that intensity down a little bit just so we have it in there.